Are you tracking a lot of stuff happening in the States? And quite frankly, it's encouraging. Given the fact that the media, we were talking with Senator Grassel earlier about this trifecta of the media, the Democrats, and the FBI. I mean, we've got all these cultural forces that are working against families and parents. And when someone steps up to protect children from the LGBTQ activist, they are pummeled. But guess what? They're coming, and they continue to come. Those that are defending children, they just keep marching, and they're moving forward. And guess what's happening? They're getting traction. And literally hundreds of laws have been introduced this year to protect children from this deceptive, devious, and dangerous agenda. Courage breeds courage. And there's a law that has now been proposed in Idaho that would allow parents to make sure that the laws protecting their children from pornographic material is actually obeyed by schools and public libraries. And I can tell you from experience, having passed a number of laws, it's the enforcement that matters. And rarely does government hold government accountable. Allowing parents to do that is important. The law would allow parents to sue in civil court if they, that being the schools or libraries, allow minors to obtain books, films, and other media that depict inappropriate and offensive sexual content. The legislation, which is House Bill 139, this is in Idaho, empowers parents to take on any institution that does not take responsible steps to restrict access to harmful material for minors. Well, joining me now to discuss this is the author of the bill, State Representative Jaron Crane. He represents Idaho's Legislative District number 12, Seat B. State Representative Crane, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tony, for having me. It's a privilege to be here.
Well, we've got listeners in Idaho, and so I want you to give them, as well as the rest of us, an update on where this bill stands, what it does, and how they can help you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share a little bit about the bill. It was introduced this week in House State Affairs Committee, and I'm proud to say that it was introduced without question and a unanimous vote to introduce. So we actually will have a full hearing on this bill probably next week, and we'll learn more about that as time goes on and we see the agendas being updated from the chairman. A little bit about this bill. House Bill 139, what we're seeking to do, and I'm calling it the Children's School and Library Protection Act. It's requiring those institutions to take reasonable steps to keep harmful material away from our kids. And we are getting a lot of blowback, a lot of pushback on this bill. What it's asking as a response for enforcement is if a librarian, and even more specifically, the institution, exposes kids to that material without taking a reasonable step, they're going to pay $10,000 per occurrence to that child and pay for that penalty. And so we're asking the libraries to step forward and to take reasonable steps to secure that material.
I mean, reasonable. I mean, they think things can happen, but they at least have to show that they're trying to protect children. And the critics are saying this is about banning books, that you're trying to ban books in the state of Idaho. I don't read it that way.
Yeah, it's not a book ban bill, and that's what it's being framed as, because if we can start down that path, then we can start saying, well, what about this book and what about that book? I had a legislator come up to me today and say, hey, I'm getting blowback from my constituents saying, what about the Bible, the Song of Solomon? And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. There's actually inside of this bill, we talk specifically about it, and I listed in here, there are things that have artistic, political, and scientific literary value. Come on, that's common sense. We know what pornography is.
Well, the problem,
and so what we're trying to,
the problem has been that schools and libraries are exempt from the restrictions on obscenity and pornography, so they get by with this big loophole. You're closing that loophole and saying, hey, you got to take reasonable steps, and if you don't, parents can take action to protect their children. Is that correct?
That's correct, Tony. And you know it as well as I do. If a 7-Eleven clerk passed out pornographic material to a kid, they would have criminal charges against them. So what we're saying is, why would a library be any different? These are where these kids should be able to go.
It's even worse. It's even worse because that library is funded with your tax dollars.
That's exactly right. And I've told people that. I said, this isn't a private thing. This is our tax dollars. We should know that when we send our kids to public libraries, that they have every single thing taken care of, and we shouldn't even have to worry that they have access to that kind of material. This is public taxpayer dollars. It's in our state's best interest that we bring up a virtue and moral people.
I agree 100%. So very quickly, Representative Crane, how can viewers and listeners help? What do they need to do? Who do they need to call?
They need to call the legislature. Specifically looking right now, they're looking at transferring this bill. It was in House State Affairs. I have a meeting with the speaker after this interview here to go talk with him to make sure the bill stays in House State Affairs. Currently, they're trying to push it over to the Education Committee, and I'm going to find out why that is. We want to keep it in House State Affairs. So stay tuned for where this bill is going to end up. But right now, contacting the Education Committee on the House side or on the State Affairs Committee would be very welcomed, telling them to support this piece of legislation.
All right, we'll encourage all our listeners and viewers in Idaho to do just that. Representative Crane, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate your time.